Okay, the last conservation genetics video, and this one is dealing with inbreeding, and in particular inbreeding in small populations. So the background is that it was thought in the past that genetic factors didn't really contribute much to the fate of endangered species, so we didn't really have to worry about it that much. However, there is evidence now that in small populations that genetic problems is one of the most immediate problems in causing a species to go down the extinction vortex, and that inbreeding depression is one of the main causes of genetic threats to species in populations. So inbreeding depression, what is inbreeding depression? Well, basically, inbreeding, first of all, is the mating of individuals related by ancestry. It is measured by the probability that two alleles at a locus are identical by descent. So it basically means that if you have a diploid organism, both of the alleles at the locus on both of the copies of the gene are identical. In other words, the organism is homozygous for that particular locus. And this increases when you have systematic mating between relatives, and that becomes particularly prominent when you have small populations. So this is particularly important to small populations, whether they be on small islands or whether they occur in small fragments of habitat which have been cleared in a landscape. So what does inbreeding lead to? Well, basically it reduces heterozygosity, the amount of diversity. The more inbreeding you have, the more chance that you get two of the same alleles at the locus of a particular organism. So that can be a problem when those alleles may be recessive, deleterious alleles. So when you get both of them, they both express the protein, the same protein, and that protein may not be as efficient, may not be as good as the dominant allele, which doesn't produce the bad protein. And this will lead to reduction in reproduction rates, at least in the short term. So as we saw with the cheetahs, you get problems with sperm, problems with conception, and kittens and offspring are aborted and so on. In the long term, two matching deleterious recessives can lead to death of the organism, and so can lead to lowered reproduction rates or reproductive output, which would then lead to smaller population sizes. And it will also lead to lowered heterozygosity in the population as a whole, and it can lead to an extinction vortex, which unchecked can lead to extinction. So what is inbreeding? In small closed populations, all individuals eventually become related by descent. So eventually all the genes are mixed and all organisms are of the same genotype. How quickly this happens really depends on the effective population size. The larger the effective population size, the slower it occurs. So if you have an effective population size of 500, you basically are not going to get inbreeding very quickly. But if you have a very small effective population size, the population will become inbred very quickly. So this is the inbreeding coefficient F, so that's the amount of heterozygosity lost compared to a Hardy-Weinberg formula. So large population sizes, the amount of heterozygosity doesn't get lost so quickly. Small population sizes gets lost very quickly. So effective population size causes a population to become inbred very quickly. So a measure of the inbreeding coefficient, F, is 1 subtract the observed heterozygosity over the expected heterozygosity at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So we compare basically the heterozygosity we observe in a population, and we compare that with what we would expect if Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium was occurring. And it basically, the lower the heterozygosity, the lower the F. Okay? That's right, yeah. So inbreeding reduces the reproductive fitness and outbreeding in plants and animals. So inbred plants flowered later, had fewer number of ovules and pollen, produced fewer seeds, etc., all these bad things. In animals, it results in fewer offspring per litter, lower birth weight, fewer litters, lower juvenile survival, and all of these bad things. So inbreeding depression is a bad thing. Just going back, yeah, if heterozygosity is lower, that means a lower number, which means a higher F. So yeah, so if a population is more inbred, the F tends to be higher. Okay. So inbreeding depression. So the change in F is proportional to the inbreeding depression, and as a result, 10% loss in heterozygosity will result in a similar 5 to 10% decline in reproductive fitness. So an increase in inbreeding will lead to a decrease in reproductive fitness and all of those problems with reproduction that you saw in the previous slide. Now, an important point to note is that inbreeding tends to have a threshold relationship with extinction. So you can lose quite a lot of your heterozygosity through inbreeding up to a threshold. Once you get beyond that threshold, you reach a point where the population suddenly nosedives. So the population will persist quite well until the threshold lower limit is reached, but then it suddenly declines to extinction. So causes of inbreeding depression: the dominance hypothesis. Inbreeding results in more deleterious recessive alleles appearing in a homozygous form, and this results in bad proteins being produced, and the organism, the individual which holds those deleterious recessive alleles, will then either die or won't be as competitive, and therefore these recessive alleles in the homozygous form will be more likely to be deleted from the next generation. So you would lose these deleterious recessive alleles. Now, so what? These deleterious alleles are being lost. That's okay. We don't mind about that. And in large populations, it actually may be important, as we will see later on, and a method by which populations purge themselves of deleterious alleles. But in the short term, it means death of an organism, and it can mean reduction in reproductive rates, reduction of individuals, and therefore reduction in genetic variability in the population. This is quite an important problem in conservation biology. The overdominance hypothesis focuses on the loss of genome-wide heterozygosity and associated hybrid vigor due to the population becoming more homozygous. So as you will lose these recessive alleles, the dominant ones become more prominent, and you are more likely to get homozygous individuals. So if you study this slide, you can see that if AA, the AA genotype, is lethal, a lethal allele, then all of these individuals will die. And so the genotypic frequencies as you go down will become more and more of the dominant A type, which is non-lethal, and the lethal recessive will effectively be winnowed out of the population. So that heterozygosity is reduced from 100% to 12.5% in 3 generations, if that is the case. So deleterious recessives can lead to decrease in variability, but more importantly in the short term, reduction in reproductive fitness. So reduces genetic variability in the long term, reduces the vitality of the population in terms of reproductive ability very quickly, and reduces hybrid vigor of heterosis, so the amount of heterozygous individuals at a larger number of loci in the genome, which is always a good thing. So factors which affect inbreeding depression: the level of inbreeding. Obviously, the more inbreeding that you have, the more inbreeding depression you have. The rate of inbreeding is also very important. So the amount of the increase in the level and the increase of rate of inbreeding increases inbreeding depression. And finally, the harshness of the environment. So these the rate of inbreeding is going to be affected by the size of the effective population. If you have a large population, a large effective population, then it doesn't matter. You can sustain a certain amount of inbreeding, and it may actually be a benefit to the population because it purges the population of deleterious alleles. The harshness of the environment can also affect inbreeding depression, because a harsh environment would mean that all offspring and all individuals must be fit to survive. If some of them have deleterious alleles, then they are not going to survive a harsh environment as much, so they're more likely to die. Some populations may experience low levels of inbreeding for many generations with no effects. So you can get some inbreeding, and that can actually act to bring deleterious alleles together, and those individuals will be eliminated from the population, and therefore you would lose those recessive alleles, those deleterious recessive alleles. So it's thought that slow inbreeding has given natural selection an opportunity to purge populations of deleterious recessive alleles. Now, the emphasis has to be on slow inbreeding. If the inbreeding is rapid and it's of a high rate within the population, then it's going to express all those deleterious effects which will lead to population decline. But if it's slow inbreeding and it's a small proportion of the overall breeding within a population, then it won't cause so much problems. So how do we get rid of inbreeding depression? Simple. You outcross an inbred population to another unrelated population. So if you have a population in a protected area which is inbred, all you need to do is bring in individuals from another population, and you will relieve that inbreeding depression. So in summary then, inbreeding reduces genetic diversity by increasing the expression of deleterious alleles, and offspring will die. The number of heterozygous alleles is reduced, and therefore in the short term fertility and reproductive fitness is reduced, and in the long term genetic variability is reduced, and therefore the ability to respond to environmental changes is reduced. So overall, inbreeding, not a good thing, particularly not at high rates.